You're listening to The Stall and Stable Show, ideas for happy horsekeeping.
This is episode 153 of The Stall and Stable Show. I'm your host, Helena Harris. Today is Sunday, February 1st, 2026. Woo, I've been podcasting for a long time. I'm actually not your host today. Your host is going to be Buck Harris. In this episode, Buck is going to interview me, and we're going to give you an update on what I have learned in the last 18 months in the master's program at Penn in animal welfare and behavior, and how that applies to horses and training and our industry and all sorts of things. So it's a long conversation, but one that I think you'll find interesting. So listen in. Hey, Buck.
Hi, Helena.
We're back.
We're back. I'm delighted to be interviewing you for a little podcast episode to talk about what's been going on in your interesting life.
I don't have a very interesting life.
I think you have a pretty interesting life.
All right. So what's going on? We're here. It's okay. First of all, today is Sunday, February 1st. We are sitting in the tack room at Who Hill, which is the new name of our farm. And it snowed.
We're snowed in.
We're snowed in. Well, we're not snowed in, but we got, 2.5, 3 inches
Can't
of
we
snow?
just pretend like we're snowed in? Then it doesn't feel like we have to go somewhere.
That's true. It's cold here. It's like, I think the high is going to be like 37 degrees today, which is really unusual for South Carolina. And I think I have a little PTSD from, dealing with horses in the snow for 30 years.
But at least we're not carrying buckets of water this year, which is nice.
I know. I brought our heated water troughs down with us, and that was the best decision I could have made.
We did get a little frozen pipage, but I think we're okay. I think we're on the mend.
Yeah, we'll live.
Everything is thawing out. So
why are we here?
We're here because I wanted to capture the spirit of what you're doing. Because what you're doing is so much different than what you were doing. And I thought a great way to start capturing the spirit of what you're doing is to go all the way back in time, way, way back from when you were a little girl.
Okay.
And tell me, it may not have been when you were a little girl. It might have been when you were in your teens or your 20s or your 30s even. Tell me when you first felt the enzyme of your sense of wanting to do nice things for horses at the most basic level.
Well, that's a big question. I didn't start off with wanting to do nice things for horses. It started off with wanting to do nice things for animals.
Animals in general.
Yeah, small animals. When I was little, so my family, we're all from New York, and we had a house up the country, we called it, and it was in the Monticello, Bloomingburg area of New York. I'm probably like 2 hours outside of New York City, 2.5 hours. And my big Italian family used to take us kids to the racetrack. So we would go watch, harness racing. And I thought that was just the coolest thing in the whole world. You just going so fast. And then there was a person behind the horse. And I was like, I want to do that. I want to move as fast as that. And I wanted to do it behind a horse. And that's my first memory, of these horse things. These are cool. And then we'd had animals, and I was just that, some kids, you guys listening, that some of us are just born with this sort of sparkly goodness for animals in our blood. It's in our DNA, and you know it and you feel it. So I can't remember a distinct moment where I went from not caring to caring. But I do remember this feeling building in me from a little kid, through teenage years and adulthood.
Well, can you remember a feeling of this animal isn't being treated well and it hurts me or it bothers me?
Yes.
Because I don't think I really felt that until I met you.
I know.
I always thought everything was fine.
Well, like pretty much everybody else, if a dog Peter pooped in the house, somebody would come along and bop it on the nose with a newspaper and say bad dog and point their nose at it. And I do remember thinking, this dog looked so frightened and worried, but I didn't see any recognition in their expression that they were connecting the punishment that they were getting with the behavior they'd done. I do remember feeling that as a kid, not a real little kid, but thinking, okay, they were, they pooped in the house. That's really bad. And they're being reprimanded for it. But I saw contrition in the dog. I saw sadness, but I didn't see any kind of acknowledgement of like, oh, okay, I understand why this is happening. I did see confusion. I recognized confusion in the animals' faces. But it wasn't until I became a small animal vet tech that I got an understanding of just how misunderstood animals were, because clients would come in and we're holding the dog or the cat, we're taking temperatures and we're doing all these things. And the owner would be providing this narrative about their pet. And they would be describing some of the things that the animal would do or that they were feeling. And especially if they were coming in because they weren't well. And that was when the light bulb started to go off. Like, wow, there's a real disconnect between what this owner sees and thinks and what's actually happening in the animal's body. And so that was the first time I started to look at or to think consciously, is what I'm looking at actually, or is what I'm perceiving what's actually happening?
Okay. And I think that, well, just to reference what Helena's talking about, my mom, we had an English setter. His name was Pete. And if he, had an accident in the house, she would not stick his nose in it, but put his nose close to it and have a rolled up newspaper and tell him bad dog and whack him on the butt. Now, my mom, God bless her, was not a harsh or unkind person by any stretch of the imagination to people or animals in my mind. But this was, I think what she did was a typical kind of misinterpretation of what an animal can understand. Can you, so going.
And my grandparents did the same thing.
Yeah,
it wasn't just
yeah.
everybody did it. That's all we knew.
That's how you taught the animal.
Yeah.
So now to fast forward, as you all may be aware, Helena is in her final semester of her animal welfare program at UPenn, and she's really learning how to connect the science to what's happening in an animal's head to help us all become much better at communicating with animals. Can you give me an interpretation of what that act really was, like from a behavior perspective, and an animal welfare perspective, taking a dog and putting its nose in front of a mess that it made and swatting it on the butt? Like how would you even interpret that now in terms of science, and how far off was it?
We're really far off in so many different ways. First of all, the dogs don't know right from wrong when it comes to human requirements. So they don't know that they shouldn't go to the bathroom in the house. So they don't know that it's wrong. So when you punish them for that, for what we call an unwanted or undesired behavior, they don't make the connection between what was right or wrong. Now, when we talk about how animals learn, typically they learn through associative learning or non-associative learning. So if they make a mistake or they go to the bathroom in the house and we're there within 3 seconds and we administer some sort of punishment, yes, they can make the connection between the behavior that they did immediately preceding the punishment. They can make a connection there. But without getting into the cognitive science of animals, punishment is never really a good way to learn for any living thing.
And can the animal at that point understand that they shouldn't have gone in the house, and then you put them outside, and then they go, oh, next time I'm going to go outside?
Yeah, no, that doesn't happen. And that doesn't mean that there are animals who don't have the ability to think ahead. Science is studying this all the time, and there are some mammals that are going to say a little higher up on the sentience, and the intelligence levels that, are capable of some higher thinking. But for the most part, our companion animals don't have the type of forethought, planning, and executive functioning that human beings have.
So in that, I'm going to stick with that example because it's just so strong in my mind about how absurd it really is. Do we typically apply that type of training, quote unquote, to other animals? And are we expecting the animals to think like a human at that point, or is that the way we train horses too? Kind of like bad horse, and they really have no idea what the heck we're doing except that they're scared and confused.
That's how we train everything. That's how we train children. That's how we train ourselves. That's how we train,
Husbands, wives, we all use fear.
We do. And, there's one of my courses in the Penn Vet Animal Welfare and Behavior Program is on a branch of science called anthrozoology, and it studies the connection between humans and animals, our relationships. And a lot of how we interact with animals, including how we train them and how we punish them, is based on these just old, antiquated cultural and religious beliefs. And the underlying theme there is this idea of good and bad. And so if an animal does something that is inconvenient for us or even dangerous, we call that bad. But we fail to recognize the true source of the behavior, which for most animals falls into one of four categories, but all four of those categories is about evolutionary fitness. Is this behavior has a specific reason, and it's typically, the reason is typically how to keep that animal alive, or how to keep them, or how to make reproduction more successful. So when we look at animals through an evolutionary lens, the behaviors, whether we want them or not, they have very valid reasons. So punishing an animal for a particular behavior that we find inconvenient simply because we just don't want it to happen is extremely confusing to the animal. Horses in particular, because our punishment of horses is extreme. And it's extreme because of their size, how quickly they move, and how dangerous they can be when we are working in close proximity to them.
And so if you were to just go back to my thinking around this timeline, you started working with horses. I mean, you were exposed to horses when you were a teenager, Camp Scuffy.
When I was a kid, I was 8 or 9 years old.
8 or 9,
yeah.
Okay. And then fast forward a little bit, more exposure with animals. At what point, with horses, at what point was your exposure to horses such that you were like, there's a disconnect here that bothers me, and I want to try to address that with my own contact with horses?
I had ridden plenty of horses. I took various sundry jobs working at barns just to learn and to, have the ability to take riding lessons and be around them. So I got to ride a lot of different horses, lots of ponies, because I'm a small person. So it was easy to pop me on ponies, especially ones that were green. And most of the horses I rode were forward thinking. They would go. And so, basically that's, well, how do you stay on and how do you control that forward thinking energy? That was the core of my experience. Even with lesson horses, I guess I had what they call a hot seat, which is I have a lot of chi, a lot of ADHD, energy. So I was taking a lesson one day on a little dun quarter horse, and we were trying to get the canter. And horse wouldn't canter. And my instructor said, use your whip, use your crop behind your leg. And I just did not want to hit a horse. But I really wanted to learn. I really wanted to get this canter. So I grit my teeth and I put the whip on behind my leg, and he bucked me off.
Oh, I thought you were going to say he went right into the canter.
Nope. He bucked me off. And it was fine. It was one of those cases where I didn't get really hurt, but I felt such an emptiness. It was like my insides collapsed, like my heart, my energy, everything just collapsed because I knew instinctively that that's not how you get a horse to cooperate. And that for this horse to have bucked after that told me that something was really wrong. He couldn't canter. And I felt horrible. I felt absolutely horrible.
And then did you get back in the saddle and they try to make you do it again, or what? How did it play out from there?
I can't remember what happened. I definitely got back on. I never used a whip again. I never used a whip to get cooperation from a horse again.
Wow. That's saying a lot.
Let's put it that way. I never struck a horse. I have used dressage whip since then as a tap, not a thwack. Okay. So that was the first time something happened and I couldn't let it go. Like, this was horrible.
So that stuck with you though throughout your lifetime of being around horses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so how would you handle it going forward if you were on a horse and you were taking a lesson and someone asked you to do something that flew in the face of that old experience? Like, that's not right. How did you handle that?
Now or after that?
Well, beyond that, I mean, it's a tough thing to handle sometimes. I mean, I know how you would handle it now. You'd be like, no way. Like now it's
fuck
easy.
You.
But what about when you're a teenager or you're in your 20s or your 30s and you don't have that level of confidence and you're around people who really are quote unquote accomplished riders or horsemen?
Yeah, that word accomplished is something we could do an entire episode on.
Oh, let's do one.
Deconstructing what it means to be accomplished.
We're going to do one.
So, and I go in and out of being angry and judgy at people and being really understanding because I was in the same place. Before I knew better, I did what I thought was best or right. So, listeners, forgive me for going in and out of different emotions as I talk about this. When you study animal welfare science, it's a challenge. It's an emotionally challenging branch of science, but I'll do my best here. So over the years, I started to now remember too. I have previous corporate history in product marketing and management and development, communications. So I have had plenty of time to learn how to take an idea or a message and craft it into the right words. So some people are creative with a paintbrush or pencil. Words are my creative outlet. So I've experimented over the years with finding short diplomatic sentences that would help me say to someone, that's not a good idea. I'd rather not. I don't think this is right for the horse. Kind of experimenting with...
I'm not comfortable with that.
Right, with different scripts. But because I felt like I was not accomplished, because I'm not a 5-star eventer, I'm never showed at Madison Square Garden. I've never jumped a Grand Prix. I, couldn't rope a cow to save my life. So because I didn't have those competitive accomplishments, I was always a little bit insecure about what I knew about horses. So even having these scripts and even finding the courage to say to somebody, I'm not comfortable hitting a horse, I never did it with the conviction or confidence that I have now. And so that got me branded in my community. And even in the, as a podcaster, it got me branded as someone who was timid. Or, when I started to use positive reinforcement, I had one woman who I worked with and who said, clicker training, that's too backyard for me. So I was labeled as not badass enough, not confident. I had to show the horse who was boss. What do I know? Because I don't have my USDF gold medal.
Yeah, but you also had two things going on, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong. You were certain about what made sense to you, but you also had the uncertainty of, does this actually make sense? And what, how do I, where do I fit into the horse world given the boundary that I think is important? Is that kind of the sense that you got? There was uncertainty in there somewhere.
Oh, there was a lot of uncertainty because I was learning as I was doing. So I was navigating this world, which is a really interesting world. The horse world is very different than any other animal community that's out there. Horses are one of the most long-lived companion animals on planet Earth. We've got dogs, we've got cats. Some birds, live as long or longer than horses, but horses are the most highly trained of companion animals. Yep, we've got detection dogs, but the physical development of a horse's athletic training, the precision, the amount of behaviors that we have to shape in order to ride and train horses is extraordinary. And it is unique in the human world and the animal world. So the amount of time that a horse has to put up with aversive training methods and chronic stress.
And they have a person on their back, which is a lot different than training a dog. I mean,
They have a
dogs go
person
through
on their back.
their own level of stress, but they're not carrying someone or pulling a cart or something where they're truly engaged in a very, very one-on-one way with whoever is working with them.
Yeah. And even if we're only on their backs for 45 minutes a day or 20 minutes a day, there's a lot, there are a lot of aversive things in the domestic horse's life. And but I want to step backward just a minute because you had asked me about when welfare really became front and center in my world. And when I got my undergraduate degree in environmental studies, and I was focusing on wildlife conservation and public policy. And so, right away, right when I graduated, I was doing some internships and stuff in New Jersey, but I couldn't find a real paying job in what I wanted to do, something that would allow me to pay the rent. So I ended up moving to Boston because I had applied for a job as a humane educator with the Animal Rescue League of Boston. And there were a lot of candidates. I was one of the top 3, and ultimately I didn't get the job. But I was 22 years old, and so at 22, I knew that I wanted to get into some kind of humane education. It only took me 30 years to get there. But so I had known about welfare and the humane handling of small animals and wild animals, but I really didn't understand how to be humane or what it meant to be humane to horses. Again, just like everybody else, because you think when you are working around an animal that's large and swift and scared all the time, you very quickly realize your danger risk. And when human beings are frightened, fear and aggression often go hand in hand in the brain. And it's not just with humans, but it comes out a lot in humans. When we get scared, it's like the companion emotion is anger immediately. And for many people, we skip right over anger and we go to aggression. So when a horse frightens people, a lot of times we will lash out physically. And that's part of what happens with horses. The other part of what happens with horses is that cultural thing I was talking about is, the idea of good versus bad, right versus wrong, and the cultural influence that religion has played on how humans perceive others, including other species.
So we go from anger to acting out,
Mm-hmm.
or fear to anger to acting out.
And then, I mean, that happens in a millisecond.
And but I would also add frustration
Yep.
causes an acting out. And so frustration is going to come from a variety of sources. Why do you think? I have like 5 questions brewing in my head right now. Why do you think people get frustrated when they try to train horses? And then part B, why does that turn into human behavior that flies in the face of the animal's welfare?
Oh, so frustration and anger also come, acting out, that also comes, together. Frustration is a buildup of tension, and tension has to be released somehow. And I don't know enough about human psychology to know how common it is for frustration to manifest as physical aggression. I know it happens quite a bit. But, and I also know that it happens quite a bit in horse people who tend to be on the, who tend to be biophilics. And if you want to look something up, look up E.O. Wilson's biophilia hypothesis. Biophilics to me is the same thing as ADHD or ADHD. And ADHD people tend to be attracted to the same kinds of things, particularly animals, especially horses, especially high adrenaline sports and activities, the outdoors. We also tend to be highly empathetic. So a lot of us land in the equestrian industry, which means we see a lot of frustration when we're working with horses, and then we also have some emotional dysregulation that comes with this biophilic brain. Again, whole nother podcast. But the frustration is primarily, in my opinion, because horse behavior is grossly misunderstood by the person working with them. And I would say since this is now my entire life, and I spend every waking minute reading the literature on this stuff.
And I've seen you reading in your sleep, so I would say it's pretty much 24/7.
Yeah, it is pretty much 24/7. The number of people all the way up to the very highest levels of equestrian sports who actually understand horse behavior outside of the arena or outside of the bridle is very, very, very small.
So how is that possible? Does a person who's frustrated with a training situation just find a way to make it work, and the horse's welfare is secondary to that? Because
Yes.
they just and so A, they don't care about the horse's welfare, or B, they don't understand that what they're doing is flying in the face of the horse's welfare. So they figured out a way to get the horse to do whatever it is they're asking, and therefore that's their method, and they're going to go forward with it regardless.
That's exactly right. Both of those things, all of those things. And I don't think that I do think that there are some people who really don't care too much about the horse's welfare. And, I'm in a good place. I understand that. I don't want to judge it because we don't all have the same motivations in life. People get into horses for different reasons. Some of us just because we love the animals. Some of us because we love flying forward through space and time. I was a skier, I was a diver. I did all these things. Getting on the back of a horse and galloping across the countryside is like, that's the ultimate for me. So the motivations of a horse person are varied. But you do find that it takes a very different personality profile to be successful as a high-level competitor. They almost have that Machiavellian dark triad narcissistic types that they are able to put their empathy for the animal in a box in exchange for what they have to do in order to get the job done and win. That does not mean they don't care about the animal or have empathy. It means that when they experience the cognitive dissonance that comes along with, I should care about this animal's feelings, but I also care about a blue ribbon or a gold medal. That conflict, that moral conflict that they experience, that results in what's called cognitive dissonance. And, listeners, you probably heard of that term before. So how we deal with that cognitive dissonance, right? That conflict inside of us, that is as varied as the people who ride horses. Some people will justify what they do by saying, well, this horse is dangerous, so it's either him or me. I had to hit him. Or this is how it's always been done. Or this is what so-and-so, a 5-time gold medalist does. Or this is what that natural horsemanship cowboy told me was the right thing to do. Or Xenophon. So there are plenty of ways for us to justify compromising a horse's welfare, even though we know instinctively that what we're doing is inhumane or wrong. Does that make sense?
Oh,
it was a
absolutely.
little ambiguous.
I mean, this is the world we live in with horses.
Yeah.
What I have come to learn in the many years of living with Helena is it dials itself back to a very basic level. In other words, when I go out and Susie's eating hay in the field and I'm picking manure and I go over to her and I pat her, to recognize that she doesn't like to be touched while she's eating hay.
Yeah.
And that is the most subtle form of compassion for an animal when you say, you know what, for me, I really want to scratch you and hug you right now. You look so beautiful. The sun is shining on your furry coat in the winter and you're warm. And I know how much you're going to enjoy this hug. And then you do that and the horse swishes its tail and drops an ear like,
yeah. And then
do you really have to?
Someone else would be like, you bitch.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And that,
regardless of the reason why, once you start to respect those signals, you actually can develop a different relationship with the animal. Am I on track there?
1,000,000% on track. And you had asked about, horses being misunderstood, and the source of human frustration with them is because we misunderstand their behavior. We don't really know what's happening. And I think and that's not the horseman's fault necessarily. Science and the general public, or science and the equestrian public, has not always had a great path of communication. A lot of scientific research has been kept behind a gate. It's a little elite sometimes, especially in the language that they use and where the information was published. So there were a lot of us who wanted to know better, but couldn't because we didn't have access to the kind of research that was actually happening. So that's one reason why we misunderstand horse behavior. We just didn't have access to the information. The other thing is that when we experience something that's uncomfortable for us, like a horse stepping on our foot, and we don't know why it happened, we fill in the gaps, the mystery, we fill in those gaps with what we do know. And what we do know is, well, what would a human do? So we look at horses through a human behavior lens, and when something happens that we don't quite understand, we label that with some kind of human behavior. And that's a double-edged sword because, many of us have heard the word anthropomorphism, which is where you attribute human characteristics and cognitive abilities to an animal that doesn't have those. So when we misunderstand a horse's behavior, we tend to fill in the mystery with what we do know about humans, and we apply human intent and abilities to that behavior. So the double-edged sword is that we kind of need that anthropomorphism in order to have empathy for the animal. So we have to be empathetic enough to recognize that a horse is in pain, or they are frightened, or like you said, Susie doesn't want to be touched when she's eating hay. So we have to be empathetic enough to put ourselves in the horse's shoes, right? To respect their behavior. But we also have to be careful not to cross the line and attribute human abilities, especially cognitive abilities, to a horse where those don't exist. Because then we attribute an intent that will get them punished. They don't have the same kind of intention that humans do.
What is a horse's intention?
To just stay alive and reproduce. If you find this stuff interesting, look up Tinbergen's 4 questions. And if I can, I'll put it up on our website. But Tinbergen's 4 questions basically breaks down all animal behavior into 4 primary reasons. And they're all about evolution. They're all about staying alive long enough to reproduce.
So at some level, a horse is basically coping with us. In some way, shape, or form, I don't want to say with every interaction, but with many interactions, a horse is coping with what we're asking it to do in the face of, I really just want to stay alive and reproduce.
The very definition of welfare is an animal's ability to cope with their environment and their circumstances. And yeah, you were going to ask. Go ahead.
So what hope is there for me to have a good relationship with an animal if that's its only 2 motivations?
That's the great question. Why do we have relationships with animals? And there is a scientific journal, as I was telling you earlier, on this very topic. It's called Anthrozoos, and it dives very deeply into the human-animal relationship, why we spend time with them. We are, well, I'm going to mess this up, but in the words of Chief Seattle, we are all connected. We are all part of nature's web. We are one. And this also goes back to the biophilia principle or biophilia theory that, when we were hunter-gatherers, it's community. There were people who, we had these little tribes. And if an animal was brave enough to spend time around these human tribes, maybe to get some scraps of food or shelter from the weather, or whatever else humans could provide to that animal that supported that animal's evolutionary fitness, those genetic traits in the animal eventually led to them living with people, tameness, and then ultimately domestication. So, but there are stories going back thousands of years of tribes that would live with bears and raise them as their own children. Women who would breastfeed other species to keep them around, would love them the way they would their own children. So this concept of, an animal being less than a human is a relatively new thing, a new concept in, human evolution. So the relationship between people and animals is a very, very long one. In science, we call it interspecies interaction. And it's, when your barn cat likes to rub on your horse's face, or your horse is happy to get along with a goat or a chicken. It's when your dog and your cat share a bed together. It's why we like to have dogs.
But there does tend to be a relationship that's very important, and I would say definitely to the human. In dogs, you can see that relationship is important to the dog.
Yeah.
In cats, I believe it's important to the cat, maybe less so, but still important. Is the relationship with the human important to the horse in your experience and in your now scientific professional opinion?
That is such a super cool question. I would love to do a whole episode on that.
I just wanted yes or no.
I know. Come on. It's me. I have the yes or no does not register. Okay. So the short answer is there's no short answer. So in free-ranging horses, no, there's really no benefit to the human being unless we provide some sort of protection from predation or food and water. In domestic horses, yes, I do believe that when all of the horse's needs are met as a species, meaning when we fully recognize what equines need in a domestic environment, and the only variable there, meaning they are content, they have everything they need as a horse, and then we introduce the human connection as a variable, I do believe that we are beneficial to them for entertainment purposes, for curiosity, but also because we can provide things like fly masks and shelter and food and water. So we can contribute to their survival and even their contentment, not just survival, but their happiness.
Is it, well, here's just another question. Can a horse experience a human's love if we can communicate with them in a way that they actually can understand? Can they experience affection? Can they experience compassion? Or, is it possible through spending time with an animal that it develops a connection with you that's important?
Yes, but on a level that is not, and I think this is where a lot of people who love their horses in a big way get into a little bit of trouble, even me. Horses do not, in my opinion, right now, based on the current science that we have, they don't experience love the way people do. They do, however, experience affection and friendship and positive relationships and bonding.
You had an experience with Clarabelle the other day.
Yeah.
Recount that for
Oh,
me.
man. Yeah. In animals, we call in animals we call these kinds of relationships affiliative relationships. They're friendships
Between animals.
between animals. And it could be between animals or between species. Like conspecifics is the word that we use for animals of the same species. Intraspecific or interspecific is when we is between species or different species. So affiliative relationships between horses and humans, yes, I do believe they are possible. I was sitting down on one of my water troughs yesterday, and I just popped a squat because I was kind of tired getting ready for the storm and everything. And so I was essentially
You
sitting
weren't in the water trough. It was turned upside down.
It was turned upside down. I was sitting on it. I was like 8 inches off the ground, so I had my back up against the barn wall, and Susie and Brody were off. I don't know what they were doing. They were up to no good, probably. And Clarabelle hung back, and she stood near me, and she just kind of hung her head in my direction. And Clarabelle's not huge on being scratched or touched. So I decided not to touch her. I just kind of looked at her and said, "Hey, girl," soft. And I preach this all the time, go spend 3 minutes out in a field with your horse. Don't look at them. Don't touch them. Don't talk to them. Don't be a stimulus of any kind. Just sit there and be in their presence. So that's all I did yesterday. And she kept taking tiny little steps closer and closer to me until she hung her head up into my chest. She didn't really touch me, but she was like right there. Like her whiskers could feel me. And she proceeded to fall asleep.
Just right there.
Yep.
So,
And I had to not move. Yeah, everybody knows what it's like to be cat trapped or nap trapped by a baby.
what does that feel like?
I was pony trapped. It felt like I got it right. It felt like, okay, because when we give the animals the freedom to choose how they want to engage with us, what they want that interspecies relationship to look like, and then they make the choice to be with us, that's a big deal. Because for most of a horse's life with human beings, they don't get to choose what they do.
So you're making space. Make space, let the animal decide. And then you live with the consequences. Whatever the animal decides, if they just walk away from you and ignore you, or if they decide they want to be with you. But I do think that there's times when, no matter how connected you are to that animal, just like your kid or your spouse, they're going to walk away because they got something else they want to do in that moment.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
Yeah. Or because you are somehow aversive to them.
Or because you're somehow aversive.
Even if you don't mean to be.
Right. Okay.
Like I'm a very fidgety, hyperactive person. So I've had to learn, and I am close to mastering this because of positive reinforcement work, to be still. And it's something, it's being still is the very first lesson that I teach any horse, through behavior management, through positive reinforcement. And so I had to learn how to be still myself, because even if I was still in my body, if I was not still in my mind, something about my energy or my breath, that lack of stillness became a stimulus for the horse. It was something they had to process. And so I lost my train of thought.
Well, you've been saying for years that a horse's behavior is a reflection of its owner,
Right.
in many ways, and I think that what you're giving us is a picture of what that can look like,
Right. So
in a positive way.
getting back on track after that detour, what I preach all the time is go out and spend 3 minutes with your horse in proximity to them, no closer than 10 or 15 feet, and do nothing. If you want to look at them, fine. Maybe a gentle hello. But don't move, don't talk, don't, just shut your brain off and be there. Because that is how horses develop the most important con-specific relationships in their family groups and in the larger herd. They simply exist next to one another. Each horse has a job. They have a function in that family group. Herds are actually the larger unit. Family groups are like, families in a neighborhood. A herd would be like multiple families together in the same neighborhood. So the family groups, they're bonded, and that their social cohesion happens simply because they stand near one another and they watch. And whosever job it is to go find food or water, when that horse decides it's time to move along, then the rest of them will follow. If there's one horse whose job it is to look out for predators, everybody just hangs out, just doing their thing, eating, but watching. And so that when we do that in the company of horses, when we just hang out next to them, we are in many ways acting very much like another horse in their social group. That builds trust.
That's where I was going. The T word, yeah.
Yep. That builds trust. And trust becomes the foundation of leadership, which you hear a lot of people talking about. And those people are usually inside of a round pen, and they have a stick and a flag or a whip or a rope halter and a line, and they think that that's how you establish leadership. It is not. Trust. But you first have to open the door to the bank of trust by doing nothing. And that's probably the hardest part for us as horse people to do.
One of the things I had said to Helena many, many years ago is I want to stop acting trustworthy and I want to be trustworthy. And a horse knows the difference. They know when they're around someone who's going to act trustworthy until no one's around, or act trustworthy and ride that line, and someone who's actually trustworthy. And I think if there's anything I've learned from being around horses, it's a way of self-development for me, because it sure shines the mirror at me of what my abilities are and where my own emotional regulation is, and how my needs are ultimately getting met through this horse-human relationship. And it just can't be about that first and foremost. It has to be a true partnership. Can you trust a partner that hits you? Like if you had a partner in tennis, I like to use it, doubles tennis, and if you made a bad shot, they came over and whacked you. You wouldn't trust it. You wouldn't play tennis with that person. But we expect horses to be okay with that and actually like us more or behave more.
Yeah, to do what we want.
So we're pushing our time here. I have a couple things I want to get to. I think one of the drawbacks. Yeah.
I got to very quickly go back to this thing that you said. You're hitting on so many wonderful points, and I think it's because you live with me and hear this shit all day long. But a lot of people will say, horse welfare and treating them humanely, it sounds very kumbaya, right? And even the word welfare has some negative connotations to it. And So on the one side of the spectrum, we got beating horses over their head with a 2x4, tying them to patience poles, leaving them in horse trailers for 24 hours or 3 days to desensitize them. Side note, don't ever do that. And then on the other side, we have the, PETA people who are like, horses should all be set free and we should never ride them. They're not designed to be ridden. But while that's technically true, the work that we do with horses, the training that we do, even the competing, it does make us better human beings. For the majority of us, they do reflect who we are. And, as anybody's ever been bucked off and hit the dirt, or kicked or stepped on, working with horses levels the playing field among humans. It doesn't matter how much money you have. A horse just sees you as either kind or not kind, right? Trustworthy or not trustworthy. And so I very strongly believe that the work that we do with horses and the work that they do for us contributes significantly to our development, our growth as human beings, as quality human beings. And there is a huge element of magic and mystery in there. It's magic that science cannot explain, and it's mystery. It's a perfect mix of magic and mystery. So we don't want science to steal that sparkly goodness. So I just wanted to make sure that I got that in there because you had said,
well,
they're good for us.
It leads into the next thing, which is, if I put an animal's welfare first, is that going to negatively affect my training with that horse and my riding, my individual riding goals? Do I naturally say, well, I'll never be able to do certain things if I put an animal's welfare first, and I'll never be a really good competitive rider because I'm always not doing the thing that I really feel like I need to do?
That is the best question of this episode, and I'm glad we're going to wrap with this. The answer is you can do both. In fact, when we prioritize the horse's welfare, we get better learning and performance outcomes.
Why?
Because they're healthier, because they're more cooperative. It goes faster. Stress inhibits learning. That has been proven in many different animals, including people.
So you can get a one-off behavior by putting a horse under stress, but that horse hasn't actually learned anything?
Correct. So when we look at operant conditioning, we have the 4 quadrants of operant conditioning. We have positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment.
And Helena's going to rename those someday because they're so confusing.
Well, I've boiled them down to 2. We have aversive stimuli and appetitive stimuli. So we can teach the horse through something that's pleasant, what we call appetitive, or we can try to teach the horse using something that's aversive to them, like pressure, or a whip. And so science has shown time and time and time again that learning outcomes are far better when we use positive reinforcement. This is including in people.
I was going to say, remarkably, this is where humans and equines meet.
In all animals. Remember, we share a mammalian brain. So there's a lot of what we do that's similar. So positive reinforcement is, and Shauna Karish introduced this to me back in 2014, I think was the first, or 2012 was the first time I interviewed her. The seeking system and the brain chemistry and the neuroscience that supports learning through positive reinforcement. So using positive reinforcement in practice, you can achieve every single thing that traditional horse training can achieve using positive reinforcement. There is a very, very tiny amount of negative reinforcement, which does not mean bad, and it is aversive, but you can do everything that you want to do with horses using positive reinforcement. The challenge there is how much time do you have? But that's a little bit different. It doesn't take, years compared to traditional trainings taking days. It takes a little bit longer, but it only takes a little bit longer to get over the initial hump. Once you get over that initial hump, everything you do after that once you've earned the trust and the cooperation of a horse, all your subsequent training will go much faster.
That's exactly it. I think that if I'm frustrated because positive reinforcement training, in whatever way I decide to do that, isn't working, it's probably because, number one, I'm not doing it in a way that's effective. Number two, I don't really understand the horse the way I think I do.
Yep.
And number three, I don't have that vision for, well, once I understand actually how to communicate with the horse effectively in this positive way, the next time I work with another horse, or even better yet, this horse, they're going to get it faster. So I can't front load this thing. I have to actually put myself through the process of learning how it works, understanding the science behind it, and then I'm off to the races. I saw Helena go into someone's backyard paddock. He's a super nice guy, not an experienced horseman. He's ridden, but not a person who's ever done much training. And he bought a horse, and the horse wants to pin its ears and bare its teeth and bite. And the horse had actually bit someone. And so he was desperate to get some help. And from the second Helena walked into that paddock with this horse, the energy was unbelievable. The calmness and the peace that came from it. And that's not to just say Helena's a great horseman, because she certainly is, but it's more around the experience and the energy she's put into her own understanding. So then everything she did, every movement she made while she was with this horse had context for her understanding, not just, we're going to get this horse to stop doing that. The behavior was quite secondary to her desire to communicate, her desire to build trust, and to respect the horse's boundaries in the very beginning. And so the young man who was there was just dumbfounded. He was amazed at the things that were happening, and he was also got very committed to understanding what Helena was doing. So it was a really powerful moment, but it wasn't a one-off. It's a long trip to get there, and now that you're there, you understand that it's going to be up to the horse and the trust that that horse has with its owner in order to really begin to resolve the relationship. And I think that's where welfare comes in, and the compassion that we have for these animals, understanding that there's shortcuts, and there's shortcuts to everything in life, but doing something the right way is where the healing and the love happens. And that's really, I think, that sparkly goodness that you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that's what attracts us to horse sports and to riding and to driving, is that mix of something very concrete, something that's blood and bone and fur and teeth, and then this magic. And I want to kind of bridge the gap between those two things. And if there is, I did a behavior workshop for professionals this week, and it was awesome. It was just so fun. But one of the things I want you listeners to understand is that, especially if you're a professional, is that you're not going to reinvent the wheel here. If you're like, geez, I wish we could leverage better training practices, more humane training practices into my everyday life, you can. You don't need to start from scratch. And I think that's one of the things that stops professionals from really giving this topic the light of day that it deserves. Because by acknowledging that there are more humane training methods, it would mean that they have to go back and start to put their money where their mouth is, right? And they'd have to start incorporating these positive reinforcement, let's just say, or behavior management into their programs. And most horse professionals are running on empty to begin with. So who the heck has the time to learn something new, let alone be a beginner at something, right? When they compromise their expertise or authority, they risk their clients, right? If I can't be a beginner, I have to be the expert in this relationship.
They feel that they're risking their clients.
Right, they feel that they are. So I'm trying to set up a place, a forum in person where professionals can come and learn about this stuff in the safety of a place where everybody signs a non-disclosure agreement because you're not talking about who's here. We've got enough gossip and bullshit in our industry, right? So this is a safe place to learn about this stuff. It's a safe place to be a beginner. And you have somebody who can give you small little packets of this stuff that you can take back to your farm and start to experiment with and gradually introduce more humane practices piece by piece instead of having to take on the overwhelming task of completely starting from scratch. You know, a lot of the people who support positive reinforcement and welfare-friendly training practices in the horse world, we can get really judgy because we see the bloodshed. We see the fractured bones. We see the horses that get flipped over. We see the ulcers. We see the worst part of humanity in horses. So we tend to be a little bit judgy. And this is what you're doing wrong. This is what you're doing wrong. I'm no exception, but I'm working on that. So this space that I want to provide for professionals is the opposite of that. You're not bad. You're not a bad person or a bad horseman because you're using some aversive training methods. No. But you need to open your mind and you need to be willing to be new at something for just a little bit of time. And just like with horses, once you get over that initial hump, everything that you do with positive reinforcement and behavior management going forward will get easier and easier and easier. And you will find that a bigger and bigger chunk of your training program will be very welfare friendly to your horses and their performance will improve.
All right, I have one last question for you, and this is a yes or no question.
Okay.
And you have to answer yes or no.
Okay.
Has the science that you're learning now validated the inner mystic who knew that there was another way to work with animals?
That's the best part of my life, is having felt this for a very, very, very long time. You know, having waved the flag. And I mean, Glenn and I used to talk about this on Stable Scoop. You know, every interview I was like, well, how does the horse feel about that? You know, and rah, 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 and little things that would happen on social media and hills that I was willing to die on. I was not confident until I entered this program at Penn Vet. I didn't know what I was getting into when I applied. And
is this your way of saying yes?
God damn me. Yes. I'm just so honored to have been given this opportunity. The people in this program and at this university, its reputation is well deserved as an institute of higher education. It is not just about the quality of what you're learning. It's about the quality of the people who give a huge shit in all the best ways. I love them. I don't ever want to leave.
Well, it's been a joy to watch all the light bulbs going off on a regular basis above Helena's head, and to see somebody who can really sink their teeth into something to learn it, not because they want to get a degree, but because they're just so fascinated by the subject matter. It's enviable.
Oh, my professors are all stoked that I want to continue on with research.
Yeah, she's going to graduate and she's crying. What am I going to do?
I know. I'm like, find me a PhD program right now. Well, thank you guys for listening to this. And, this is it. We have no sponsors. We're not looking to make money right now. I like to say I'm here to change the world. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to change the world and to make it a better place for people and horses. And so I'm here. If you have questions or you find something that Buck and I talked about today interesting, you guys know where to find me. I do have... I got off of Facebook and other social media. The only thing I do have right now is Instagram. And that's mostly to stay connected with my friends and family. But of course, I post horse stuff on there all the time. So if you'd like to follow me on Instagram, I think, I don't know what my Instagram is. It's, Harris Equine Behavior, maybe. And we do have the website, which is whoharris.com.
Well, thanks for being a guest on your show.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for interviewing me. You're awesome. You want a job? You want my job?